Oh, hello. An interesting week. We got a lot to talk about in the dispatch today. An interesting medley of topics. I guess, Jen, we should tell people up front about my week, though.
Oh yeah, should we ever? You've had it
So
rough.
last weekend, I out of nowhere felt grit. It kind of felt like sand in my throat, and I was like, okay, interesting. And I took a rapid test, and I was negative. And on Monday, I woke up in the morning and I could not get out of bed. And I was not in any particular pain or distress. I didn't feel sick, but it was like some life sapping alien had taken all the energy out of me. And
Dementor.
I said to my wife, like, you got to get the kids dressed. And my wife leaves before I take the kids to school normally, but she just had to take over. And I'm thinking to myself, I tested negative last night. And so Monday was a complete write off. I was eventually like aches and pains hit me. I felt hungover. Like anyone who's had a bad hangover where everything hurts, but nothing in particular hurts. It's just sort of this diffused whole body suffering. That's how I felt all of Monday. And I was never fully awake or asleep. And that was most of Tuesday. And then all of a sudden it just went away. It was just done. And I remember like being in bed going, I think I can get up now. Like, it's just like, I think whatever this demon has left me. I took another rapid test and I was negative again. And my daughter the day before had complained of a gritty throat, and we rapid tested her. And then the next morning she said she felt fine. So we sent her off to school. And Wednesday I felt fine. Thursday I felt normal. And I took one more rapid test almost out of curiosity, and I was positive. So whatever I was going through on Monday, that kind of diffused, painful whole body hangover, was whatever this latest go round with COVID was. The first time I know I had COVID, and I didn't test positive despite regular testing until I was already well past it. The rapid tests aren't working right now.
Well, and this is something interesting because you're not the first person I've heard this from.
Yeah.
I've heard this from multiple sources now where people got sick, did the rapid test,
Yeah.
even with symptoms, it's showing up negative, and then boom, at the end of their sickness, then finally they're showing up positive. Something about this variant is not connecting with the rapid test.
Rapid tests are missing it.
This could be anecdotal, like, we're just relying on our friend groups, but like it seems to be this common problem. The other interesting thing is everyone I know in Ontario got sick this week. Everyone just got it. And our wastewater here in Alberta and in the West is showing also that there's an uptick in COVID as well, but no one I know is actually sick. Which indicates the virus is circulating, but for some reason, and probably we're not feeling it. And I think that's just because it's already basically ripped through the population.
It's interesting because with one of my kids having eventually tested positive, so won't be in school for a couple of days. Like after I tested positive, we retested everybody. Wife and one of my kids absolutely fine. One of my the other kid testing positive but asymptomatic. So the fun part is when we look at symptom onset based on Ontario regulations, by the time I knew I was positive, because you date your isolation to the first symptom, I was out of isolation. By the time I knew I was, like, it's ridiculous. Like, I'm not particularly worried about this in terms of an impact on our strategy, but the whole rapid test yourself and isolate is not working, because I experienced mild unpleasant symptoms, rapid tested myself twice, with 1 day spread between them, was negative both times. So I'm thinking I've got a seasonal bug, I've got masks are coming off, so other viruses are starting to circulate. Anecdotally though, you're not wrong. Everybody has COVID in Toronto.
Everyone has it. Yeah, it just hit. So this is an interesting thing, is that I think that, we've been kind of avoiding talking about COVID because we kind of,
there hasn't been a ton to say.
There hasn't been a lot of time to say. And bluntly, I think that the media has been so inundated with really alarmist, it's not bad yet, but it's getting worse. It's not, the hospitals are fine, but they could be totally overrun. And I think that at this point, that's just stupid. It's just stupid to be running those types of stories. I think that if we would do something on the Rona, it should be something to the effect of, I mean, here in Alberta, for example, our wastewaters have gone up, our hospitalizations have actually always been pretty high, but our ICUs are totally flat to declining. I think that that is the trend we're seeing right across. That's the trend we've seen right through from Omicron. It's that you know, this does not appear to be the hospital killer, the ICU killer that previous waves have been, thank God. So my suspicion is that essentially we've moved into an unacknowledged herd immunity strategy. Probably it's time for us to just acknowledge that. And probably it's time for us to just be like, look, this is as good as it's going to get. And it's not bad. It's a manageable situation right now. The thing's endemic. Everyone's getting exposed. Everybody's going to get exposed. It's not going to overrun the hospitals at this point. You know, barring some terrible new crazy mutant Ninja Turtle variant, which could happen, but barring something like that, this is now just a seasonal illness, and you're going to deal with this like you would deal with any other major flu according to your individual risk profile.
In the Omicron wave, the original one, kind of late last year, early this year, let's call it 3 months. Let's call it December, January into February.
Sure.
I think it was a
Back
little
when I
shorter
got
than
it.
that.
Yeah.
I think it was a little shorter than that, but let's just call it those 3 months. I probably knew more people who had COVID in those 3 months than I had known in the entirety of the pandemic up until then.
Totally. And if you look at the numbers, that makes perfect sense.
I would say what is Ontario's having now, and this is again just my own anecdotal exposure, is much worse. Like just it's much more. It's just everywhere. I was joking with friends, and this is a little grim, so forgive me, but it's like the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan when like everybody's just getting mowed down. Like you're not avoiding this thing.
No,
but
our
hospitalizations are up, but our ICUs are not. At least not. There isn't a clear upward signal in ICU yet. They bounce around a bit, up 5, down 5, up 10, down 10. But looking at the 3-month chart just before we started rolling, hospitalizations are up sharply in recent days. ICU admits are flat, and the indicators don't lag this much. If there was going to be ICU movement, I would have expected to see it by now.
There has been a very clear secondary decoupling of case rates from ICU rates. That has been happening throughout the pandemic, but now it is an extremely wide decoupling. I mean, I think I saw the Ontario hospitalization rates, and like the vast majority of people who are in ICU right now are not in ICU with COVID.
I feel badly, and I mean this very sincerely. I feel badly for people who are in some way particularly vulnerable, immunocompromised, disabled, elderly.
If you were an unvaccinated elderly person with
you're unvaccinated
comorbidities, well, that's true. The vast majority of deaths, by the way, are happening among people who are over the age of 70 and unvaccinated.
Yes,
vast majority. And most of those people also have multiple comorbidities as well. So
I think I'm looking at this, and I think you've already said it. And I don't say this to be defeatist. Like, if we want to debate public policy measures at this point, hey, let's have the debate. But I think you're onto something where this might be the normal. And I know that people are going to be pissed off that we're even suggesting this. This might be post-COVID life. Like, this just might be what that means, where it's going to circulate. Our wastewater metrics are going to fly up and down. We're going to have people going into the hospital, and there will continue to be in Ontario. You had mentioned what was you mentioned this at the beginning. I forget it. What was Alberta's hospital's ICU number?
Oh, okay. So to give you a sense of at the peak of the Delta wave, when we were talking about triage and hospital care collapse, like I think that our ICUs were around 300.
Okay.
Now the fact that we were around 300 in a province of 4 million is crazy.
Yeah.
But there lies. It was around 300, and like we were stretching up to 310, and that was where we were starting to really run out of steam.
What are you now?
Right now, 44.
Okay. Yeah, because
44.
Ontario is about quadruple your population. Not quite, but we'll keep the math easy. So your ICU peak at 310 was higher than our ICU peak.
Oh yeah. Per capita, yes.
Yeah, our official. I mean, it's hard because our official ICU peak was about 900. Operatively, it was actually higher than that, but we were basically giving ICU level care and whatever beds we could cobble together. So the numbers got weird, but basically you peaked higher than we did per capita.
Yeah,
and our effective peak would have been ballpark, let's call it 900. it probably you could probably sell me on it being higher than that, but we'll call it 900. As of today, we're 160 something, and we'll see where we are a week or two from
you
now.
have remaining ICU capacity, and like I said, the majority of people within ICUs are not there with COVID,
What
or
was
not there because of COVID.
yeah, no,
They're
and
probably
it's
getting
like,
COVID when they're there.
we will
But that's the
see.
situation.
We will see where we are in a week or two. I'm like, I wrote a column in TVO this week where I basically say, look, these indicators sure are lagging this time. Like, if we don't see any big movement in a week or two, and that was half a week ago now,
Yeah.
then something is different that we have to kind of acknowledge. The facts have changed, and it is possible. And this is why I do feel badly for the people who are particularly vulnerable here. This might be, as you've already said, as good as it gets. This might be post-COVID.
This is
where
going to be as good as it gets. Yeah.
a guy like me gets nailed and has a miserable day and a half, and then gets up and resumes life, and people who are compromised maybe get seriously sick.
It indicates also that like you're going to get that sick again and again and again if we have reinfection rates, and I don't think that's the case. If Alberta if my anecdotal observation is playing out, reinfection does not mean that you get reinfected just as bad every time. Reinfection means like, okay, so I actually got COVID back in February. I was out for about a week. I was pretty sick. Like I had a flu. It wasn't the worst flu I'd ever had, but it certainly wasn't a cold. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I'm sure I've been exposed since then because Alberta is totally open and we've been out living a very normal life. So if the wastewater is indication, I don't think it's can't rule out that I've been exposed or whatever. I'm sure lots of people have, but nobody I know is actually sick. It's
just interesting. And let's talk anecdotes here, right? Because
sure.
The reason I tested myself again, even after I felt like 95% recovered, is one of my good buddies had told me, I haven't felt well this week, and for work reasons, he has to test himself regularly. He was negative, positive. And he said to me, by the time I tested positive, I felt better. And our symptoms sounded very much alike. So I kind of thought, like, on a whim, all right, I'll test myself again. That's when I tested positive. Yeah. He and I talked about kind of what our symptoms were, and I've kind of described it as, like I said, like a crippling hangover combined with seasonal allergies. For a respiratory pandemic, I had like my nose was a bit runny. Like when I was at my worst, my nose was a bit runny. That's it. And one of the things, though, that was interesting, and this is purely anecdotal, and I wonder how you felt in February. I had never felt that way before. I've been sick before. I've been hungover before. But I felt when I woke up on that Monday of, oh, this is something I have never had before. And it wasn't worse. It was just different somehow. And my friend said exactly the same thing.
Yeah, I would say that was my experience as well. It did not feel like a normal illness.
Cold or flu. Yeah.
It did not feel like a normal cold or flu. It did feel different from what I was used to. But
it was like as severe as a cold or flu, but it didn't feel like a cold or flu.
No, exactly. So like it was a bit, it did not feel like a normal cold or flu. There was something different about it. Now, was it like, oh, catastrophic? No, not at all. Like it was fine, but it sucked, but like it was fine. But there was something slightly weird about it for sure.
I think like I've been thinking about what was different, and I think when I get a cold, like a normal seasonal cold, or even if I get a touch of like a flu, which I haven't had in a while, thank God. Flu is really unpleasant. I am full sucky man baby. Oh, I have a cold. My life is over. I'm pathetic. This hit me really hard, really fast, and then it was gone. And it was like the curtain rose, and it kind of like, I've been thinking about it for the last few days. It's like, I think my mRNA boosted super immune system saw the thing, killed it, and stood down. It was just okay. Now you're gonna like. So the day after that, I still felt a bit tired. Like I took a nap, like the grown up I am, and I went to bed earlier than normal, and my appetite was a bit off. By the day after that, I felt completely normal, and now listen to my voice.
You sound normal.
This is a respiratory illness, and so anyway. All right, we'll put a little medley of all those things together. I do find
like
the rapid
unacknowledged
test.
herd, just like the rapid tests aren't really reliable for some reason in this particular variant. It does seem like we're moving to an unacknowledged herd immunity strategy, and that's probably not the end of the world, but it is psychologically really hard for people who have imbibed a lot of the most terrifying messaging on COVID to make the transition to be like, okay, now you're all going to get it. There's nothing to be done.
And it does suck for the people who are.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because
I presume that goes without saying. If you have a specific conditions or whatever, you are in a different space, and incredible sympathy to you. That's all I can say.
In all the original waves, my writing stands as my proof of this. I supported most of the public health restrictions. Some of them were dumb or theatrical, but in general, I was on the side of let's take strong action, let's slow this thing down, because there was a point. We were buying times to first invent the vaccines and then to procure the vaccines and then to deploy the vaccines. When Omicron came, I looked at the infectivity rate of that thing and I was like, well, okay, time to change strategies. Like nothing we had done until now is going to work against this. And I think some people haven't made that mental pivot, which is sort of the stuff we did before isn't working. Although, like I said to you, there's no calls for lockdown in Ontario right now.
No,
in Ontario,
there's been a pivot. There's been a pivot.
No calls for.
There has been a shift. Yeah.
No calls for lockdowns. It's everyone saying we need better mask mandates or more access to PCR testing. All right, let's debate the merits of that. But I'm interested by what we're not calling for.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think you're right. It is very, very interesting that there has absolutely been a shift or a transition on that kind of stuff. So it's I agree.
All right. Well, we'll put a pin on that one. Budget. So here's my meta thought on the budget, and I'll throw this to you. I wrote this for TVO already. It's a placeholder budget. The government's like, well, we don't know what's going to happen, so we're going to put some money towards keeping the NDP happy because they're our new blushing bride. We know we have to spend some money on defense, so we're going to budget some money for defense, but we have no idea what to spend it on because we've ignored the military for so long. Here's a budgetary envelope, and we'll figure out what to do with it later. Basically the same thing on housing, right? I mean, so they're going to ban foreign buyers from buying houses. We're going to
call me when you're ready to dismantle the CMHC.
Call me when you've come up with anything, because basically, like, huge parts of this budget are like we are committing X billions to accomplish TBD. Like we don't know yet. So Miss Freeland is getting lauded for her prudence or her restraint or whatever terms we want to use for it. But I actually just basically think it's a tacit recognition that nobody knows what's coming. Nobody knows what's going to happen. And the government has put the box into what they feel they need to for pragmatic or political reasons, and they'll fill in the details later when we have the slightest clue what we're up against.
Well, also, I kind of object to the idea that this is a pragmatic budget.
Yeah, only by liberal standards.
Yeah, not only that, only by liberal standards and only by post-COVID standards is this a pragmatic budget.
Yeah,
it's $56 billion in spending. Like, of deficit in spending. 2017, that would have not been acceptable. And I would also say, like, it would be much, much higher had a combination of inflation and resource revenues not managed to significantly reduce even that. So like, this is not a pragmatic budget. This is a high spending budget. It's a high spending budget on a lot of really marginal efforts that will make no real substantive difference to the economy or any of the major issues, will only further fuel inflation in a sort of marginal way, is not going to bring down housing prices, is not going to make housing more accessible for the vast majority of Canadians. Targeted packaged funding to like supercluster crap is, I think, an absolute waste of money. And then, it's not even particularly prudent by traditional or by historic standards. So like, I don't think this does anything. I think this really sets us, does not fix any. It's a placeholder budget.
It's
could it have been worse? Yes. Could it have been better? Sure. I mean, you either had to like go full austerity here, or, you know, recognize that inflation was about to hit and we're just going to like supercharge very specific sectors with smart spending. And I don't think that we're doing either of those things.
Well, I always like to paraphrase the prime minister: worse is always possible. So yes, it could have been worse. It is, yeah. I did laugh a little bit at people saying, "Oh, this is the most conservative budget the Liberals ever had." That's technically true, but that's not much of a comment. I mean, the Trudeau Liberals, at any rate, and it's interesting. I mean, I know it's been 14 years, but what was the maximum deficit for Stephen Harper during the economic crisis? Wasn't it about 56 billion bucks? Like Stephen Harper's worst ever deficit is the Liberal prudent budget, and yes, we'd have to adjust for inflation, blah blah blah. But it just jumped out at me. I'll actually go pull those numbers.
Yeah, I'd be curious.
We'll see. I don't have really anything else on budget. I mean, there wasn't much there. There
wasn't much there, except for the fact that it's a lot of deficit spending. I would just add.
Yeah, no, and they're putting bucks down on the things they know they need to put bucks down on, with no specific idea of what to do with the bucks.
The other thing I would note here is that, as someone who's been watching the Alberta budget for a really long time, promising that you're going to reduce spending later almost doesn't. I don't have a lot of faith that that's actually going to happen, because in my experience, it almost never does.
I'll quit smoking next week.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Once you get hooked on program spending, you know, you've got two options. You can either grow your way out, you can increase taxes, or you can cut. And governments never cut. You'll notice they have not actually increased taxes in any systemic or sustainable way.
Oh, they're going after big incomes.
They're going after big, but I mean, these are like one-off things. They're not gonna fix the systemic sort of revenue problems.
Nope.
And once you get into a problem of systemic overspending, that's a really hard problem to fix over time. It does not tend to be a problem that gets smaller over time. It tends to be a problem that gets bigger over time.
And then we have
do you think yeah, exactly.
And like 30 years later.
Well, and also, do you think that like the inflationary pressures are going to get any better? Do you think that you aren't going to be pressured to put money in Canadians' pockets in 2-3 years from now? Like,
yeah.
Everything gets harder from here. So if you can't curb spending now, you're not going to be in a position to curb spending when, you know, inflation's running at 14% and everybody's screaming. Like,
Also,
we get caught in
we don't know what we're going to have to spend money on in 3 years.
No, we don't.
Because we could have another COVID, or this war in Europe could go bonkers. Like, all right, sorry, we're back. We lost our connection there for a minute, so we had to reconnect. So sorry for the awkward cut there. We were trying to remember exactly what the hell were we just saying before we got cut off.
What were we talking about? I totally forgot.
We're talking about something about the budget.
Something budget.
Getting hooked on program spending. And basically I had said we are not guaranteed that 2 years from now there will not be another global, international, or national crisis that we're going to need to spend $200 billion on just to survive. And it's going to get harder and harder to do that until we get our fiscal books back in that trajectory. One of the operative assumptions of my entire career in journalism, and yours as well, because I'm a couple years older than you, and also more than that, almost not entirely our lives, but our adult lives, has been we can always boast of Canada's really good fiscal position and our great debt to GDP ratio and our world-leading metrics. Our metrics are in still some cases best in class in the G7, but only because we're all basket cases after 2 years of disaster. We don't have the fiscal firepower we did 2 years ago. We just don't anymore.
We don't. No. And also, I'm not even sure that we are better off than a lot of other.
I think we are. I think we still have lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7, but I'd have to confirm.
So you notice that the decision to focus on that was a very political decision when the Liberals got in power. Right, sure. The Liberal debt to GDP ratio was the thing that we all decided to. They're like Freeland and the Liberal governments decided to focus on when they started to run up debt. You know what I mean?
You know,
that was the decision.
I've worked in AM radio many times over the years, and as you know, and we always used to joke come ratings time that no matter what the ratings are, you can always come off a winner. You know, my show leads among white men between the ages of 37 and 42 in the midday segment. Like you can slice the data however you want. So every show would have some joke line about how we're dominating in college educated Afro-Canadian women between the ages of 58 and 61. Like you can that's in the data metrics, that might be one person, but like you can. So yeah, that was basically a lot of our fiscal planning for years. All right, so that's basically we can't do again what we did before. Ukraine. I don't know if there's a ton to say about what we covered a lot in the special dispatch we did on Monday, and I don't know if we need to say much on that front. I did want to flag two things though, and I don't know if this is new or if we had just missed this before. As hard as you and I have been over the years on Canadian journalism outlets not being on the ground, CTV and Global News both now have teams on the ground in Ukraine, and we note that and we salute them.
Yeah, I think even CBC does, but
CBC, we had mentioned the CBC before.
We had mentioned the CBC. So there is one thing that I could mention, although it's only going to get me into an enormous amount of trouble to do so, and that is there's been
never stopped you.
Yeah, so the Ukrainians themselves are pushing this idea that what's happening in Bucha and probably numerous other towns that the Russians have occupied constitutes a genocide. It doesn't.
No, these are crimes against humanity, and these are
crimes against humanity.
It's not genocide.
Yeah, they're atrocities. They're not genocide. The word has
words mean things.
And you know, if we're going to be on board with saying, like, you know, if we're going to make that argument when, for example, we start talking about Indigenous people here in North America and in Canada, and if we're going to be the stickler pendants who are just like, not a genocide, I think that it's only fair to do the same when, you know, Ukraine makes that claim. I mean, it does not, you know, there's been resettlement, there's been absolute atrocities, there's been war crimes. There have been many, many terrible words, and saying it's not a genocide in no way minimizes that. But genocide has a very specific meaning, and it matters that we don't start using genocide to describe every bad thing.
No, agree entirely. Yeah, and I've written versions of things like this before, and you're right, because our society has a habit towards maximalist language. Something is not bad, it's terrible. Something's not terrible, it's unprecedentedly terrible. Something's not unprecedentedly terrible, it's the worst thing ever. What is happening in Ukraine is awful by any standard. It absolutely fits all the definitions of crimes against humanity and war crimes under the laws of war. People should be shot for this. They won't be, of course, but they should be. But is it a genocide? No, not under the understood international definition of a genocide.
Well, and that we understand today. I mean, you could even potentially use the term like cultural genocide. You do see that there is an intent here by Russia to wipe out the idea of Ukraine as a distinct culture. So you might be able to get away with a term like that, but I don't think that you get away with the use of the word genocide in this context.
One of the fuzzy things, and this is a really cheerful conversation on a Friday, so I'm glad we're doing this. One of the fuzzy things about the accepted definition of genocide, which I don't have on me right now, because why would I? I didn't know we were going in this direction. Here, let me just reach into my pocket. I always keep the definition of genocide on me.
Just to keep yourself in line, right?
Yeah, exactly. It refers to, and this is me quoting from memory here, the physical destruction of a people in whole or in part. And I've always thought the in part thing introduced a layer of complexity that we didn't need here, because what is a part?
It just means a failed genocide.
Well, I mean, is any massacre of an identifiable ethnic or national group automatically a genocide? No, I think like a genocide has to, like, if the word is to have valid meaning, it has to be an actual extermination attempt on an identifiable group, religious, linguistic, national, whatever. Like, so I've always, yeah, you're right. People will be mad, but no, I agree with you. Like, words have meanings.
Words have meanings, and this does not qualify. So, and I don't think anybody could claim that we have been in any way unsympathetic to the Ukrainians. We have not done the sort of tanky nonsense that, and in fact, I think we've demonstrated some pretty distinct moral clarity on this particular issue. So no one can criticize us on that particular front. But you know, words matter.
Yeah, but you're a jerk if someone calls it the worst thing and you go, you're a jerk. And I mean, that's okay. We've been
I
jerks before, but that's how people tend to view this. And even if people agree with you, they're like, "Oh, I know, but don't argue with them. It's not the time
but don't
now."
argue with them. This
Yes,
isn't
it
the
is.
moment. Yeah.
This is exactly the moment because words mean things.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, sure. Let's go piss off everybody.
We'll be that jerk this week.
This
also, this is the other one. Yeah.
So two generally unrelated things, and I'm not an expert on either of them, but Jesse Brown of Canada Land had an investigation and an interview about the decision-making processes that go into deciding by the federal government what is an official journalism organization that qualifies for government support. And then a story later in the week, I don't know all the details of this, and I don't want to misstate this legally, but Rebel News has commenced legal action because apparently they had applied and had been rejected. I don't know exactly the legality of this. I haven't actually read the full Jesse Brown report, and I'm not familiar with the details of the Rebel thing, so I don't want to get into the tons of the detail here. But just in the big picture sense, you and I have talked about this before. The moment journalism status becomes something that can be conferred by some outside body, it's political. It doesn't matter if it's a group of independent experts. It doesn't matter if it's the government. There is no way to grant any organization veto authority on who is or is not journalists without it becoming a politicized process. Literally impossible.
Yep. And this is also one of the big problems that I have with sort of the idea of journalists as being a priestly caste, as so many of our peers and colleagues tend to treat it as. Or a regulated profession. There are countries out there that do treat it like a regulated profession. It's not a solution, and it involves a lot of trade-offs. And let me tell you, some of the most regulated, the UK, for example, treats journalism as a regulated profession. If you think they have more ethical standards of journalism in the UK, my goodness, let's have that conversation, because they absolutely don't.
Let's have that conversation in each other's voicemails, which will then be
yeah, precisely. I mean, journalism isn't a thing you are; it's a thing you do. Anybody can do journalism. Anybody can do a thing of journalism. Anybody can do journalism professionally.
Yep.
And you don't need a particular regulation. You don't need a particular set of credentials to do it. Or education. You know, some of the best journalists that you and I know were not raised in journalism schools, let me tell you.
I mean, I'm a military historian. People
say, you're a military historian.
Gurney, you're a disgrace to your journalism degree. It's like, actually, it's worse even than that. I don't have one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I came out of grad school and went, I got an internship and off we went.
You know, if you can generate an audience, become trustworthy enough to that audience to have that audience trust what you're saying, and you can commit journalism, you're being a journalist. You're just doing it. So the idea that we're moving to a regulated thing is something that I think a lot of our professional colleagues have clung to when they feel insecure, when they feel financially insecure. Well, the government will decide who's a journalist, and then they'll just give us money and that will fix it. No, it just creates all kinds of other problems. And I think that there's an opportunity for us to note again to our subscribers that not only are we fundamentally philosophically opposed to government money funding journalism, we think that that is a fundamentally corrupting process. As conservatives, we're opposed to it because you know it's a bad use of taxpayer money. As journalists, we're opposed to it because it is corrupting to be funded in that way. It shifts your priorities and your incentives in ways that are counterintuitive to the practice of journalism. I mean, how many independent news outlets are there right now that are essentially they exist in order to write grants for corporate social responsibility money and government grants? Like they're not journalism outlets, they're grant outlets. That's what they are. They're grant seekers. They're not there to serve an audience, or they are there to serve an audience. They're there to serve an audience of people who sit on boards and give grants to high-minded journalism sounding initiatives.
It's been a perversion of the traditional, not even journalism economic model, but just basic economics, where the supply induced the demand.
Yes, that's right.
Like, you know, there were either governments or there were philanthropists or there were, as you said, corporations that wanted, for reasons good or cynical, to promote local community journalism or environmental journalism or studies of indigenous issues. So they created a budget
Yep.
and then outlets sprung in, and it just becomes this symbiotic relationship between them. And there's been some totally fine work produced by some of these outlets, but
But it's pretty rare.
it's not a sustainable model that would work on a general basis, because you can't report on the guy
It
writing
might be a
check,
sustainable, yeah, it might be a sustainable model for the creation of a
or for that
parasitic
niche thing.
industry.
Yes.
Yeah, for the creation of a parasitic industry.
Yep.
It's a perfectly fine sustainable model. It's not a model like, look, you're always beholden to the people who cut your checks. And in our case, the people who cut our checks are our audience. So those are the people to ultimately to whom we are beholden to. If our audience likes us, they'll pay us. And if they don't like us, they won't.
We have
Okay.
accepted, and let's just be explicit about this, Jen. Certainly, like, we have benefited from professional advice or professional services that people have
Sure.
donated to us pro bono because they
Yeah.
like us, or they're happy to help us out. But in terms of our operating funding at the line, we are 100% user subscriber supported. We have not accepted a single penny that is not, with the exception of the mugs we sold. That is it. Our entire
right.
income is subscribers and mugs. Done.
And even to be blunt, the sort of government program where you can subscribe to be considered an official journalism program, and then people can use that as a tax write-off.
People have asked us about that.
Write-off.
Yeah, and I've had to tell them I don't even know what they're talking about because I never looked into it.
Well, no, I did look into it, and like, firstly, the process for getting approved is onerous and probably not worth the money and the time for us.
Mhm.
And bluntly, I don't want to have a government organization involved in deciding that we're legitimate. Like, I'm so philosophically opposed to that I have real problems with it.
Even if
that's costing our subscribers. I'm sorry.
It's true. I did look at the checklist of what a journalism outlet needs to show in order to, at least, like, kind of the minimum threshold to qualify. We would qualify. Like, we would tick every box if we wanted to. We just don't. And this is not like this. This is something we discussed like once a year and a half ago, and we were just completely simpatico on it. We just never brought it up again until it came up this week because of the Rebel lawsuit and Jesse Brown's report. So let's just say it one more time, Jen. How much money have we accepted from the government?
Zero. How much money will we ever accept from the government?
I have zero intention to ever accept any money from the government.
No, and I think that it would be a corrupting process for us to do that, and I'm fundamentally opposed to it. But that also puts us at a huge competitive disadvantage, and it just does, and we've accepted that.
It does, but it also keeps our lives a lot simpler. And I just like, it's like both the moral clarity plus the lack of paperwork.
Yeah, I agree. So anyway, this is just something that I want to flag to our subscribers. We've had a lot of new subscribers come in the last few days or last few months, I should say, and we really should emphasize the fact that our continued existence relies wholly on them, and it costs us money, and we love them, but it does cost us money to have these principles and to maintain the independence we do.
Amen. One last point to make on a housekeeping note, speaking of subscribers. So earlier in the week, when I had the death thing that I now know was indeed COVID, you, God bless you, stepped up to the plate and you just took the con. You ran the shop for a couple of days while I slept. You made a totally legitimate choice, which I totally supported. You just turned off the comments on the posts. And this is something I've done before as well. We had some questions. Some of them were upset that they were off. Others were simply curious. And one of our readers had suggested to us that we should clarify what our comments policy is. It's really simple. By default, we will leave comments open. If neither you or I is available that day to keep an eye on them, we will turn them off, because we have had issues before where there have been incidents or stuff that needed a grown-up to step in and stop or delete. And we do not actively moderate the comments. We do not approve them before they're published, but we do watch them as they go up. And what happens
as we have more paid subscribers, more people participating in the comments section, they become much more unwieldy and it's becoming more burdensome to do this. Now, we do treat the ability and right to comment as a privilege of the paid subscribers, because I think that that's appropriate. So I would like to make a habit of keeping that comment section on as to maintain maintenance of that privilege. However, sometimes it's just not doable. So we'll just have a little clarification at the bottom of the dispatch, sort of clarifying our comments policy, and make sure that people sort of understand that if it's turned off, it's probably either by mistake, because sometimes Substack automatically does that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just a mistake, and sometimes it's just because we just don't have the bandwidth to keep an eye on it.
I would also say there could be occasions where I would suggest that we establish an editorial prerogative to exercise our judgment to disable comments on certain posts.
Yes, I think that's right. Yeah, I think
there will be occasions where we don't need to deal with lawyers. So
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Certain things are just so obviously going to be catastrophic where we can make an editorial decision to not. But overwhelmingly, our decision is and has been to have comments on and unmoderated on every post. We
but
do
only
go in and clean them up occasionally when needed to. For paid subscribers.
Yeah, if you're not shelling out cash, we don't owe you nothing, buddy.
Have you ever noticed though that the most angry, strident, demanding people are the free readers?
That doesn't surprise me at all.
No, it is interesting. I can look at an angry email from a reader, click their subscription status, and I am rarely surprised.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But that also doesn't surprise me, because the people who like us the most and jive with us the most are the ones who are willing to put money for it. Or is giving us bucks, right?
Angry.
Anyway, okay, so how are we going to divide this up? Yeah, how do you want to divide this up? Do you want me to do government pay and COVID?
Government pay, you mean government paying us, like government support journalism?
The Ezra suing thing.
Oh right, yeah.
Or do you want to do that?
No, you can do that. Okay. For sure.
Unless you're really, I mean, you were the one who's just recovered from COVID, so you may be more passionate about doing it than I am.
Yeah, no, I think we're completely simpatico on our views on that. That would leave me with comments, Ukraine, and budget.
Do you want me to do the Ukraine genocide thing?
No, I can do it. I agree with your position there. It's absolutely horrible, but words have meanings here, and what's happening in Ukraine is not genocide. It's a crime against humanity, and it's a war crime.
Okay, so I'll do COVID, government journalism payouts, and really just use that as a reminder to be like, hey, we are really actually subscriber funded. And then do you want me to do the intro?
Oh, I'll do the intro because I think the Ukraine stuff should probably be the intro.
Got it. Okay.
So we'll just kind of flow it right through into that. And then and I will give, it won't be a separate blurb, but I will give a hat tip to CTV and Global for their efforts in Ukraine. And we should maybe just mention we continue to be in touch with freelancers in Ukraine, and we expect to have fresh content from them shortly. In fact, I think.
Oh, we got a good one coming.
Yeah, if that pans out, yes.
Eyebrow rises.
Well, it's sometimes the stars align. We'll just go with that.
All right. That's us for the dispatch. I want to talk to you when the video is off.
Okay.
So that people don't hear us, rambling on about our sexist policies and such. But
we already had one of those moments earlier today where I'm like, hey, before we continue talking, I should make sure we're not recording this. So we will be explicit now that we're not recording this. Thank you, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.